at one of your little drills you had, and that we're aware of who the terrorists are if you pull this. I want you to call these major newspapers. I want you to find out these statements were true by the White House about preparing for martial law, and I want you to let them know that if there is any terrorism, we know who to blame. The point is, if any terrorism comes, it's from this government. And if there was an outside threat like a bin Laden, who was a known CIA asset in the 80s, running the Mujahideen war, and whose family builds all the military bases over in Saudi Arabia right now, and sits on the board of Iridium Satellite, he's the boogeyman they need in this Orwellian phony system. I want the White House numbers up there now. A big part of this solution, after you research all the government terrorism and check out what I'm saying is true, call the White House and tell them, we know the government's planning terrorism. We know Oklahoma City and World Trade Center was terrorism. We know the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to blow up airliners, Baltimore Sun. If you do it, we're going to blame you because we know who's up to it. Or if you let some terrorist group do it, like the World Trade Center, we know who to blame. And you could save the planet.
Now, Alex Jones didn't have insider knowledge in the classical sense. He was just reading the trends. But here's an example of real insider knowledge.
What is Scenario 12D? We know it's a war game scenario, that it has to do with airline counterterrorism. Why is that important enough to kill for?
Because it's no longer a game.
But if some terrorist group wants to act out this scenario, why target you for assassination?
Depends on who your terrorists are.
The men who conceived of it in the first place. You're saying our government plans to commit a terrorist act against a domestic airline?
There you go. Indicting the entire government as usual. It's a faction. A small faction.
For what possible gain?
The Cold War's over, John. But with no clear enemy to stockpile against, the arms market's flat. But bring down a fully loaded 727 into the middle of New York City, and you'll find a dozen tin-pot dictators all over the world just clamoring to take responsibility and begging to be smart-bombed.
I can't believe it. This is about increasing arms sales.
Mm-hmm. This is Birdcage Liner. Wild-eyed crap right up there with Elvis as an alien and two-headed babies.
You obviously read it.
Don't be so damn naive.
You're absolutely sure that this is the targeted flight?
This flight was chosen primarily for its visibility. It's scheduled to pass over Manhattan on its way to Boston.
You said they intend to bring us down in the middle of New York City?
Fires. Your flight's gonna make an unscheduled stop in exactly 22 minutes.
The corner of Liberty and Washington, Lower Manhattan.
World Trade Center. I'm going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
I'll tell the flight crew.
All right, try cutting electrical power.
Who thought of that? Who thought of everything?
New York Center. This is Atlantic National Flight 265 Heavy. We are declaring an emergency. We have 110 souls on board, 16,000 pounds of fuel.
We've got manual override.
The Lone Gunmen ran in 2001.
That's right. 2000. It was a mid-season replacement, so we. Oh yeah, right. 2001. We shot in 2000, January 2001. We started airing.
When did you shoot the episode with the government secretly hijacking a jet by remote control to fly in the World Trade Center?
Yeah, that we shot in March of 2000.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, you see a plot from the TV show you were in, to some extent, coming through. Tell us in a nutshell what happened in that episode.
There is a government plot where they take a computer and basically override all the pilot's control systems, and by remote control are going to fly it into the World Trade Center in the series to start a worldwide war on terror, on terrorists.
So what do you think it is, or any ideas or feelings or thoughts on that? you know, what is it? Is it an inside track, a conspiracy with the writers of Lone Gunmen? Or is it that they were tuned into the news? And, I mean, Tom Clancy
wrote it in his book, too, right? The interesting thing that I had heard, that this goes back before even Lionel Chetwynd, that Chris Carter was at a cocktail party, and he felt very out of place, and apparently he was in a tuxedo way in the corner, and the psychic came over to him and said, whatever you're working on is going to make you a ton of money. And that was just before he did the X-Files. Well, that psychic I talked to, I go, what were you doing at the Hollywood party? She goes, I was hired by the CIA to go to parties and then just go home and email what I talked about at people. So the CIA has been tracking Hollywood parties since the 80s in order to determine, because, you know, Hollywood films are a...
They set the agenda.
They set a foreign policy, sort of. I mean,
no, it's a projection. It's America's dominance. They admit it's a lot of it's Hollywood.
Right. And so they want to make sure that all the producers and the writers, that nobody's thinking anything so radical or doing a movie that will completely undermine their foreign policy plans. And that they do that through sending women to parties and having them email. It's the weirdest thing. It's kind of creepy. Everybody I tell in Hollywood, all my actor friends, are kind of freaked out about it.
This is Steve Jackson's card